How's everyone doing today? It's your boy JJ Domination, and today we are here to talk about my favorite signings in the AFC, my favorite free agent signings from the AFC per each team. That's basically what I have planned. That's how we're going to do things. Yeah, my favorite AFC free agency signings by team. So let me go ahead and break down like how the criteria is going to be, because yes, there are teams that just franchise tagged people. There are teams that acquired different players via trade. Let me go ahead and specify the criteria. Number one, it can't be just somebody you re-signed. That's a cop-out. You know, it has to be a new player. It can't be anybody you traded for, and it can't be anyone you franchise tagged. We're strictly talking about new players coming from one team to the other because they signed with you via free agency. We're going to be covering all the AFC teams, so 16 teams. And the most amount of players I can pick is 2 per team. Some teams, I think only like 1 or maybe 2 teams won't have any, mainly because they didn't do anything in free agency, but in terms of like bringing in new players. But, you know, the most I'm going to allow myself to do is 2, because I'll be honest, there's a couple of teams that have more than 2, in my opinion. But we're going to go ahead and get started now with the Cincinnati Bengals. So right here for the Cincinnati Bengals, my favorite free agency signing that they made is defensive tackle DJ Reader, who actually played for the Houston Texans, and now he will be coming over to the Cincinnati Bengals. So for Cincinnati, they're adding, you know, just a great run stuffer who does generate some pass rush for the Houston Texans. He'll be bringing that over to the Cincinnati Bengals to play next to Geno Atkins, or maybe they just decide to trade Geno Atkins or cut him or something. But he's a good long-term solution at defensive tackle because Geno Atkins isn't going to play forever. And with DJ Reader, you can either stay in a 4-3 or you can allow yourself to move to a 3-4. He was playing in a 3-4 defense with Houston. I think he'll be just fine as a 4-3 defensive tackle, just eating up blocks and being a big body that can generate a push inside and allow others to kind of, you know, come in and get their sacks off the edge, like Carlos Dunlap, Carl Lawson, Sam Hubbard. To me, this is a great signing, a great move by the Cincinnati Bengals. The contract is 4 years, $53 million. Yes, it's hefty. It's a big contract, but the way that the CBA is going, the way that the NFL is going these days, everybody is going to cash in, especially if you're a young player with upside. You're definitely going to cash in. But this was my favorite signing by the Cincinnati Bengals. They made a few signings. This was the one to me that stood out and was the best signing that they had. Now we move on to the Buffalo Bills, and they made a lot of signings, but a lot of it was like keeping their own players and bringing in former Carolina Panther players, because as you guys know, Sean McDermott is the current coach for the Buffalo Bills, but he also used to be a defensive coordinator in Carolina, so he's really familiar with a lot of these players that he brought in, such as Mario Addison, Vernon Butler, A.J. Klein. But my favorite signing is actually from a smaller team, and it's another defensive lineman. I think he's a DT. I don't know for sure, but we're talking about Quentin Jefferson. Now, I know in Madden he's a 70, but he plays better than that in the real NFL, like in real life. So he's listed at 6'4", 291. To me, the way Seattle used him, he played all over the defensive line. He didn't really have one definitive role. Like, he wasn't just a defensive tackle. He played everywhere on that 4-3, and I pretty much envision Sean McDermott doing the same thing for his defense, and Leslie Frazier, of course, who is the actual defensive coordinator. His contract is a 2-year, $13.5 million contract, and for a high-end rotational pass rusher, or I would say at least a solid rotational pass rusher, defensive lineman, I would say that's pretty good. You know, like, again, these contracts 5 years ago would have been ridiculous, but in today's current NFL, it's really not all that bad. And I think for a guy like Quentin Jefferson, that, you know, brings a lot of versatility and isn't necessarily scheme dependent and can just plug and play pretty much everywhere, I think that's a really good signing for a team like the Buffalo Bills. Next up, we move on to the Denver Broncos, and they only made 2 outside signings so far, but my favorite one would have to be running back Melvin Gordon for a 2-year, $16 million contract. As you guys know, Melvin Gordon coming over from the Los Angeles Chargers. He's going to be playing his former team twice a year. And his contract is a 2-year, $16 million contract with $13.5 million guaranteed. So for me, that's a really good contract for a really good running back. I know you're going to look at the $8 million per year, but if you think about it, it's not long term. It's not like a 5-year deal worth 40 plus million or something like that. It's a 2-year, $16 million deal. He's like 25, 26 years old maybe. I think he's 25. But, you know, he's still got fresh legs. He did have a bad year last year, a lot of fumbles, and a lot of that had to do with him holding out, not really being in peak condition like we're used to seeing him. And I think this year he's going to be fine. Him and Phillip Lindsay, that's going to be a good pairing. Apparently, Denver wanted to add another running back to have a true 1-2 punch, and that's nothing towards Royce Freeman, but he's a really good number 3 back. But Melvin Gordon and Phillip Lindsay, that's going to be a good duo right there for Pat Shurmur and Drew Lock, who of course is going to be entering year 2. I really like this signing. Again, it's not long term. It's 2 years. He's got relatively fresh legs. It's not like you paid him Zeke's contract, which thank God you didn't. And now we move on to the Cleveland Browns. They made a lot of big time signings, and I'm just going to cover 2 that were my favorite because this team does have 2 that I really like. And by the way, if I don't mention the signing, like another signing that team made, it doesn't mean that I don't like it necessarily. It's just kind of like, it's whatever. It's a good signing, but it's not terrible. You know, it's just kind of in the middle. So for me, the number one like signing, in my opinion, for this team that they made was bringing in Austin Hooper. Austin Hooper, he's starting to get the stigma around him that he is a system player. And if you think about it, a lot of tight ends are system players. You know, George Kittle is in a great system, but he's also a very talented player. Same thing with Zach Ertz. Same thing with Travis Kelce. If you think about it, a lot of these really good tight ends, hell, even Darren Waller with John Gruden's offense, and Mark Andrews with this Greg Roman, Lamar Jackson offense. If you think about it, a lot of the tight ends these days are scheme dependent. They're system players. So calling Austin Hooper a scheme player or a system player, it's not an insult because he's really good, and he, I think, does have some scheme versatility, and he produces at a high level, as you saw last year with Atlanta. So when people say that, you know, it's not really a knock. It's just kind of a fact. I mean, he is a system player, but he's a really good one at that, at the tight end position. Kevin Stefanski, of course, the new coach for the Cleveland Browns, he's trying to replicate what they had going in Minnesota, and this is essentially his Kyle Rudolph to David Njoku, who's playing the Irv Smith Jr. role. So they're going to rock out with 2 tight ends, and the contract for Austin Hooper is 4 years, $42 million. Yes, he is the highest paid tight end in the NFL. I think it's like $10.5 million on average, but we all know it's not just a flat contract. We know, like, the cap hit will vary, blah, 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 but he is going to be the highest paid tight end in football. And another signing that they made that I really liked, I don't know the contract details, I haven't been able to find them, but it's strong safety Carl Joseph. To me, they took a 1-year flyer on him. I like that, especially for young players. I always like when a team who, you know, they may not be necessarily a contender, but they're like a good team just looking to add talent, which Cleveland is a very talented team. And I wouldn't necessarily say they're good because last year they weren't, but this year they could be. And I think adding Carl Joseph on basically a 1-year prove-it deal is a great move for Cleveland. I know we're calling things that Cleveland do great, but for real, it's a great move. They've released Morgan Burnett. They get a guy that can fill in that role. Remember, it was not that long ago they had Jabril Peppers before they packaged him in the trade for Odell Beckham. So for me, it's a good move by Cleveland. I like the Carl Joseph signing on basically a 1-year prove it, and I like the Austin Hooper signing because it's a great fit with Kevin Stefanski. Now we move on to the Los Angeles Chargers, and man, I gotta tell you, they're one of the biggest winners in free agency, in my opinion. They've done quite a few moves, but there are 2 that definitely stand out to me, and we'll talk about that. There's really 3 that I really like, but one of them involves their own player. But let's just talk about one of them real quick, and that is going to be on the defensive line once again, and that is going to be Linval Joseph of the Minnesota Vikings coming over to the Los Angeles Chargers. He was released, of course, by the Vikings to save some cap space. I can't really blame them. You know, that's kind of the situation they're in. But they cut him, and he ends up signing with the Chargers on a 2-year, $17 million deal. Linval Joseph, 30 years old. He's still got a lot of juice left, in my opinion, and I think a 2-year contract is perfect. And you're pairing him up with Jerry Tillery, who did have his struggles last year as a rookie on the defensive line. And you also have Melvin Ingram and Joey Bosa, who that's going to help them a lot because you have a guy that can truly plug up the middle and get a good push and allow the other two to wreak havoc on the edge. So I really like that signing for the Chargers. And another one that they did is actually coming over from the Denver Broncos, and that's Chris Harris Jr. at corner. I'm a really big Chris Harris Jr. fan. I've been following him basically his entire career in the NFL. Like when he was a rookie and started coming up a little bit as an undrafted corner from Kansas State, I kind of put a lot of people on that were my friends with Chris Harris. I don't know, man. I just have this thing where I used to be really good at spotting the talent early. Like even if it's just in college, like sometimes you can spot it early. Sometimes you just know, and you got to trust your instincts on it. You will miss occasionally, but sometimes you know, bro. You just know. And with Chris Harris, he was one of them, and he's signing a 2-year, $20 million contract. He is 30, but again, I think he's got 2 good years left in him, and a lot of people are saying, well, is he going to be a slot corner? Is he going to be playing on the outside? To me, it doesn't matter. He can do both. Yeah, he's better in the slot, but he can still play on the outside. Let's not act like this dude's a bum. Let's not act like he's Xavier Rhodes and completely fell off the face of the earth within 2 years. But the Chargers, man, they've had one of the best off seasons, if not the best off season, in my opinion. And they basically swapped Melvin Gordon for Chris Harris Jr., if you think about it. Next, we have the Kansas City Chiefs, but again, they're a team that really didn't do anything. All they really did was franchise tag Chris Jones, so nothing really to talk about. Now we move on to the Indianapolis Colts. They have 3 moves that they made, but only one of them falls under this category, this criteria that I made for myself. So they re-signed Anthony Costanzo. Okay, that doesn't count. They traded for DeForest Buckner and gave him an extension. Doesn't count because that was a trade. But the one signing that they actually made was for quarterback Phillip Rivers, who of course is on the Chargers. I would say, yeah, that's definitely the favorite, and that's kind of the only one we could choose from. To me, Phillip Rivers was being mentioned with teams like Tampa Bay and Tennessee, and I was telling my friends, dude, I would not like that at all if he went to Tennessee. I would not like it at all. To me, it would be a step down from what Ryan Tannehill did, because to me, it's just not the best situation for me with Phillip Rivers. And if he would have went to the Bucks, I mean, yeah, he would have had the weapons, but you're basically going to Los Angeles Chargers South, pretty much, in terms of weapons, in terms of the offense. And they don't have an offensive line either, and you would have just got killed. You know, at least they're trying to improve the offensive line in Tampa Bay. Same thing with the Chargers, but to me, this is a perfect situation for Phillip Rivers. They have the best offensive line in football, Indianapolis does, in terms of it being the most well-rounded. They have some good receivers in place. You know, T.Y. Hilton, of course, really good. Paris Campbell, a rookie. Zach Pascal's okay. They have some good running backs. They have Jack Doyle at tight end. Rumor has it they may look to add Delaney Walker at tight end. If they do, A+ move again, that would probably qualify, for this video. But yeah, by default, Phillip Rivers, and it's a 1-year, $25 million contract, so they're not tied to him long term. It's just for this year, and in my opinion, it's pretty good. Now we've made it to the Miami Dolphins, dude. They did a ton of moves in free agency, including bringing back some of their own guys, but man, they've made a ton of moves in free agency. I don't really know where to start with this team. But one move that I will talk about, they actually went out and got a running back, and that's Jordan Howard. 2 years, $10 million. I think that's a really good deal for Jordan Howard. He was averaging over 4 yards a carry when he was healthy, and he had a big game against my Packers. I remember because he had 3 touchdowns and 150 yards on the ground. Yeah, it was crazy. But I really like that signing, and I still think they'll draft a running back. This doesn't mean, all of a sudden they're not going to. I think they'll look for somebody to complement his skill set in this draft, and I think they'll probably go into the third round, second round maybe, and do that. But to me, Jordan Howard, that's a hell of a signing for me. And then another signing they made was for cornerback Byron Jones. I really like both of these signings. Byron Jones is now the highest paid corner in football. Okay, do I think he should be the highest paid corner? No, not necessarily, but that's kind of how free agency works. If you're a marquee name and you're potentially being rumored to be the highest paid corner in football, just know you're probably going to be the highest paid corner in football. 5 years, $82.5 million. Yes, he's the highest paid corner in football. Is he the best corner in football? No. But in free agency, the whole point is you're free and other teams can offer. And because you're a great corner, you're probably going to be the highest paid. So in terms of whether or not he deserves it is completely irrelevant. He's a great corner and he's been made the highest paid. We'll see if he lives up to the contract. But when it comes to the Miami Dolphins, they had a crazy offseason. They made a bunch of moves. And the thing is, they still have a lot of money left. And they could very well do much more. In terms of all the other signings in between, I don't necessarily hate any of them. But there is one that sticks out that we'll talk about in the inverse of this video, which is, like my least favorite free agency moves by a team in the AFC. Anyway, let's move on. So now we have the Jacksonville Jaguars, and basically all they've been doing is trading their players for like mid-round picks. So there really isn't a whole lot to talk about. There are 2 players that they signed, and the one that I really like the most is cornerback Darqueze Dennard, getting a 3-year, $13.5 million contract. Darqueze Dennard, of course, playing for the Bengals, had a pretty solid year last year. He's kind of had an underwhelming career up to this point, but 3 years, $13.5 million. It'll allow him to come in somewhere and be a starter, and it'll probably be decent. If you guys watched my top 10 trades that need to happen at the deadline video, which is one of my most viewed videos on the channel, I had a trade for Darqueze Dennard to go to the Seattle Seahawks, and reportedly the Seahawks were one of the rumored teams for him. And was it Darqueze Dennard or Drake or Patrick? Okay, I can't remember, but it was one of those two that I put in that video. But for the sake of me wanting to be right, we'll just say it's Darqueze Dennard. But anyway, he ends up going to the Jaguars, 3 years, $13.5 million. I think that's great for a guy that's going to be your starting corner, and you didn't really have to overspend at the position, which is a good thing because AJ Boye obviously is not here. You just have DJ Hayden and Trey Herndon. I mean, these 2 guys barely play. So the way that I look at it, you figured out at least your starting 3 for now. But of course, in the draft, you could look to add 1 or 2 or 3. But we'll see how it goes, man. I like what they did so far. When it comes to the New York Jets, I don't know. They had a weird offseason. Joe Douglas talked about improving the offensive line. They did, but they missed out on all the big free agents. And the moves that they did make for offensive linemen, in terms of bringing in new guys, I kind of don't like the contracts, and I think they overpaid because they missed out on players. So for the Jets, they're a team that actually did some stuff, but unlike the Kansas City Chiefs, who really didn't do much of anything, but also similar to the Chiefs, I got nothing for you. I got nothing to talk about. Speaking of a team I have nothing to talk about, the New England Patriots. All they did was re-sign a few players, and they didn't really sign anyone notable. I mean, unless Bo Allen is notable, but they didn't do anything. Nothing to talk about. Alright, here we go. Something to talk about. Jeez, that was fun. The Las Vegas Raiders. 2 moves that we'll talk about. And one of them is going to be inside linebacker Nick Witkowski, however you pronounce it. 3 years, $21 million, I think is really good for him because he was one of the top linebackers in free agency, along with Corey Littleton, who they also brought, who I'm not going to include on this video, but is a notable guy for best signing for the team. But Nick Witkowski, to me, came pretty much on a bargain compared to everyone else. And they got him for cheaper than my Green Bay Packers when it comes to Christian Kirksey, so that's a plus as well. So a good move by the Raiders. The Raiders have actually had a pretty good offseason. And the second free agent signing that they had that I really liked that's going to make the cut is quarterback Marcus Mariota. I don't know the contract details, but I think the more that I think about it, the more that I think it's a good fit with John Gruden, and I think it's pretty interesting to see that Mariota's basically coming in to either A, be a backup, or B, compete for a job. So we'll go ahead and just show you Nick Kwiatkowski. I meant to do that. My bad. I was reading off my phone. But yeah, Nick Kwiatkowski, pretty solid. He's been a backup for the Bears for a while, but he's a pretty solid player. He had to fill in for Danny Trevathan a few times. And then, of course, Mariota. We'll show you him real quick. The rating sucks, but he has an opportunity to come in, be a good backup, kind of learn the John Gruden offense, and who knows, man, maybe one day he'll be the starter there for the Las Vegas Raiders. We'll see. Pretty interesting signing, to say the least. Now we're here with the Baltimore Ravens. I gotta be honest, a lot of their moves were either extending players, tagging, or just making a trade and giving them extensions. They did make one signing, but it's going to go on the other video, so I got nothing for you, Baltimore. Alright, here we go with the Pittsburgh Steelers, and I got one move. Actually, no, I got two moves that I really like. Two moves. I just decided we're going to do two moves. So one of those moves is going to be for tight end Eric Ebron. Where is he at? The Colts. This was one of my favorite moves, not only just in the AFC video for Pittsburgh, but just in general. 2 years, $12 million. They stole pretty much a pretty good tight end. He does have a drop issue. You know, it's well documented. It is what it is. But you're paying pretty much, in terms of what we've seen tight ends go for this free agency, close to nothing for Eric Ebron, who just had a really, really good season like 2 years ago. And he's going to be playing with Big Ben Roethlisberger. I think that's a great fit, and I think that's a great contract for a guy like him. And the second player that I really like for this team, I forgot what position, Steven Wisniewski. I know, don't ignore Madden ratings, but he's getting a 2-year deal. I think it's like close to nothing on the contract. He played at Penn State. He's a Pennsylvania native, and he's going back. Well, he's going to the Pittsburgh Steelers, I should say. Solid guard. We know the Steelers do a great job of getting the best and getting the most out of these offensive linemen. I think it's a great fit, and I know I'm going to be very intrigued to see how the Steelers look next year, because I'm pretty high on the Steelers entering next year. If you guys didn't see my top 10 non-playoff teams that'll make it next year video, Pittsburgh was number 1, so that should tell you how much I believe in Pittsburgh. Straight up. I think they had a pretty good offseason based on the lack of cap space that they had to work with. Alright, let's just get this out of the way. Houston Texans, I got nothing for you. And finally, with the Tennessee Titans, there's only really one move to talk about, and it falls in line with what the Cleveland Browns did with Carl Joseph, and that is going to be with the Tennessee Titans bringing in defensive end. He'll be playing outside linebacker in this scheme, but they're going to be bringing in defensive end Vic Beasley Jr. I like this move. You know, it's a 1-year, $12 million deal. I think it's like $9 million, but it could go up to $12 million. Taking a flyer on a young player like Vic Beasley. You know, I think for a 1-year contract, that's not bad. Mike Vrabel can probably get him to do a lot of different things, use him in a lot of different ways, because he's got a lot of speed. He's a great athlete. And he's done a lot of different things for Dan Quinn's defense. We'll see what he does for Mike Vrabel. But I really like this move for the Tennessee Titans. You know, you're taking a flyer on them, and it doesn't mean you don't have to draft an edge rusher either. As you guys will see in my mock draft 1.0 whenever that comes out. So, yeah, that ought to be fun. Actually, will I have the Titans taking an edge rusher? I guess you'll have to wait and see. But, hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. Let me know your favorite signing in the AFC. I'll be doing the inverse of this later on during the week, I guess you could say, next week. Well, this is Saturday. Tomorrow's a new week. But yeah, I'll do that like Tuesday or Wednesday. Tomorrow we'll be doing the best signings in the NFC by team. Hopefully you guys enjoyed, man. Peace out. Stay safe out there.